Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited and very pleased to invite our speakers, Nicole de Paula and Anna-Katharina Hornidge, to join us with Alexia Fossombargi to this webinar, who is thought about as a side event as part of our audit lecture series on climate change and the challenges of development. So the way we have constituted this program with my colleague and head of the department, Diego Sanchez, on co-chair, is that we have a big lecture followed by as many events as people want to organize around this event. We had last term Professor Li Zhang giving us a fascinating lecture on the basis of her research, which has now been published in a book on the COVID pandemic and how it was lived from China. And Alexia, who was one of our students on the MPhil in Development Studies, thought that that was a beautiful opportunity to explore some of the work she has been doing on the MPhil on the socio-ecological inequalities and the zonic spillovers. And it is out of that really lateral and collaborative research and exchanges that we came up with the theme of governing planetary health in an unequal world, which is a topic of this webinar. So thank you so much, Alexia. It is so exciting and lovely to see how the hard work that our students do at the MPhil level with so much creativity can lead to new things, and how we are growing alumni networks and new partnerships, new exchanges with colleagues around the world, and especially strengthening our European ties at a time when this very weird deglobalization, or so-called deglobalization, is pushing us in all kinds of directions. It is a real pleasure to see how we can organize and exchange ideas across so many different epistemic communities, as well as regions of the world, on the topics that are so important, are so much at the heart of what it means to take climate change seriously in the context of the development challenges. So Alexia, the floor is yours. You're going to introduce our speakers, and we will together make sure that all the questions and the comments that are coming in the Q&A and the chat are being addressed. Of course, 1 hour is very short. It's going to go very fast, but hopefully this is the beginning of a much larger discussion we can have over time. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today at this event, Governing Planetary Health in an Unequal World, co-hosted by ODID and the German Development Institute. The German Development Institute is one of the world's leading research institutions and think tanks for global development and international cooperation, based in Bonn, Germany. And I am honored and privileged to work for the DIE as a researcher in the Environmental Governance and Transformation to Sustainability program. So today I am delighted to welcome 2 important speakers from the research community who are contributing to the shaping of planetary health policy. First, we shall hear from Professor Anna-Katharina Hornidge, Director at the DIE and member of the German Advisory Council on Global Change of the German government. Ms. Hornidge is Professor for Global Sustainable Development at the University of Bonn, and in her research, she focuses on the role of different types of knowledge in and for processes of change, as well as questions of natural resources governance in agricultural and marine contexts. Some of my colleagues and I have had the pleasure of working with her on planetary health in the Think 7 process, which brings together over 300 scientists to propose policy recommendations on global challenges to the G7 presidency, which Germany took over this year. We shall then hear from Dr. Nicole de Paula, founder of the social enterprise Women Leaders for Planetary Health, and Sustainable Development Goals expert at the Food and Agriculture Organization. Dr. de Paula became the first recipient of the prestigious Klaus Topfer Sustainability Fellow at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, IASS, in Potsdam, Germany. In 2021, she published the book, Breaking the Silos for Planetary Health, a roadmap for a resilient post-pandemic world. Thank you to you both for agreeing to speak at this event, and I very much look forward to today's discussion. Just to let you know that we are recording this event and they will be made available later on the ODID website. Each speaker will give around a 10-minute presentation, which will be followed by some questions that I'll ask. And then we will also welcome questions from participants in what we hope will be a very lively and stimulating debate. Without further ado, I hand over to Professor Hornidge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexia, for the very kind introduction and invitation. And thank you, Laura, for making this, enabling the organization of this important event. I'm excited to be here. I brought a few slides and I would just give me 1 second to share them so that we are all on the same page. I hope that works. Do you see the full screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I entitled the input statement as Planetary Health for Policy Making, ? As I think we will also reflect in the discussion on the potential of the planetary health concept, as well as some of its limitations that make it quite difficult to transport also into or in the policy-making sphere. And I will draw on work, and Alexia already mentioned it, on work within the German Council on Global Change, questions of global change, as well as on work within the Think 7 advisory process. Now, within the German Advisory Council on Global Change, we are working on a book reflecting on planetary health as a concept in order to remind us of the fact that many of the global challenges have joint roots, and this is basically this is causing, of course, as part of the current situation, it's causing an acceleration of challenges and the creation of what we could call cascading risks. We here look at not only multiple risks that exist next to each other, but the dynamics between climate change and biodiversity loss, environmental risks and change processes, as well as then health, animal and human health risks, as well as then also situations in which these risks, so to say, tip even further and lead to a global crisis such as the pandemic. So the intention is to work through these problems or bringing a planetary, a human health and an environmental health perspective together, and to reflect on the common roots in order to basically identify root causes that then give us leverage points in order to think about policy instruments that target these root causes. And the Council has already published a short impulse statement, or impulse paper, it's actually called, in which it sort of mirrors and sketches out its approaches to planetary health. Of course, you are probably aware of the ongoing discussions within the Lancet Commission. Nicole de Paula will give an insight into her work, and there are many other approaches to planetary health being discussed at the moment. And still, it's a concept that hasn't quite found itself yet. And within the different communities, there's planetary health, but there's also One Health, there's a number of different discussions that are summarized under one or the other concept. So the WBGU has postulated to approach the topic basically through a perspective that is mirrored here in these three first statements. States, well, our lifestyle is making us ill and is destroying the planet. Full stop, as a first statement. As a second statement, healthy people can only exist on a healthy planet. Also, this is a factual statement, so to say. And then third, well, we must initiate a civilizational transformation, a civilizational turn for planetary health. And the Council then places healthy relationship between humans and nature into its center and basically aims at bringing together a healthy planet with healthy societies. Underlining here that the third dimension of planetary health, the health of animals, is downplayed a little in the discussions. No? So it does take a human-centered approach to planetary health that tries to work through the interlinkages of environmental challenges and social challenges, but with a focus on human health and healthy societies. And if we then just take a minute to reflect on the sub-parts for doing this, the Council basically says, well, we need to understand healthy food systems, healthy health systems. What is a healthy food system? How should a healthy health system, a health care system look like? We do this by then also reflecting on healthy living environments. What are the forms of transportation, of mobility, of the systems that enable mobility that exists, and how do production and consumption patterns look like that can be called healthy, meaning healthy for humans just as much as for the planet. No? And it then moves from the analysis, the level of analysis in these 5 areas of action, one could say, to the fields of policy action, basically. And here looks at, on the one side, policy for planetary health, as well as on that science, research and development and education for planetary health, no? Depicting these 2 areas that it targets basically when thinking about policy recommendations. Now, with these discussions in mind, we entered in the beginning of this year, Alexia mentioned it, into the German G7 presidency. Germany took over, as you know, from the UK and published a G7 presidential program with 5 priority areas, of which one is the area of global health. Of course, here in the beginning, mainly thinking about the pandemic. Very quickly after taking on the German G7 presidency, the Russian invasion into Ukraine happened, which meant that the priority program was not changed, I would not say that, but has sort of received or has been enriched, one could maybe say, by another level of urgency in many ways. And for the work here at the German Development Institute, this meant that the advisory process that we were mandated to facilitate the Think 7 advisory process, so basically to bring, Alexia mentioned it, bring experts from all G7 countries together around these 5 topical areas of the presidential program, and in order to then advise the government and the group of Sherpa of all G7 countries on the G7 program, basically, that is being now formulated in the coming months. And this meant that for these activities, of course, the Ukraine situation has played in the last weeks a substantial role and will continue to do so. And nevertheless, I would now report on these discussions and reflect on how we attempted to develop the planetary health concept further in a way that can speak to policy making. And this maybe also by keeping in mind that within the German ministerial situation, or between a number of ministries, the One Health concept is the concept that you hear a lot more often within the health ministry, just as much as within the development ministry, as well as in the environmental ministry. And nevertheless, we are convinced within the group of scientists working on planetary health that it falls short of underlying the planetary limitedness, which is so crucial in changing the dynamics when reflecting on the urgency of and the need for immediate action along the lines of environmental and human health questions. And what we within this advisory process argue in a summary is to put up, we would ask the G7 leaders to invest into a global health compact 2030. That is the main message, to invest into a global health compact 2030, mobilize the political leadership for such a compact. And then we argue that this compact consists of 7 sub-areas. Now, first of all, we underline as part of these 7 areas the need to fulfill already made promises. No? So we have a situation where in the beginning of January, only 30% of the vaccine doses that were promised in June 21 under the UK presidency to be delivered by G7 countries were only mobilized, only 30%. No? And of course, similar, it looks also in other fields, if you think of climate financing, etc. So we have a situation where our credibility, the credibility of a world order that rests on rule-based approaches is at stake. And this is exactly what we now negotiate when we think globally, internationally, and on multilateral levels about the situation in the Ukraine. Yeah? It is about global solidarity, which is a reciprocal solidarity and requires that promises are being kept. So this is the first statement and part of the Global Health Compact. Fulfill what you've promised. And second, we underline the need to strengthen the multilateral health governance and do this by take political leadership to drive up the contributions by nation states to the WHO in order to make up the financing of WHO up to 50%, make it up out of these individual assessed contributions by 2023 and increase this even further to 2034. Then we argue to embed the ACT Accelerator and the COVAX facility within the existing global health architecture. I think that's quite a crucial statement here, and to establish a new ministerial level priority infrastructure task force to give also effect to the G7 Global Health Compact priorities. So to basically create the institutional landscape that enables the implementation of the Global Health Compact that we speak about. Third, we argue will proactively reduce the fragmentation of the global health architecture and system. That's something that is being argued for again and again. How can it be done? We say, well, we need an interagency standing committee for global health that can take on this coordination basically between different multilateral institutions in the field. Fourth, we argue that the transregional dialogue to achieve health targets has to be facilitated and increased. And we suggest here to the G7 to invest and initiate a range of new transregional health dialogue series where G7 members and beyond basically can facilitate and enable dialogue around health topics within the G20. And then, of course, also beyond the G20 context. No? But to here emphasize also the fact that the G7 is part of the G20. It's not either or. And we need to be very cautious in facilitating dialogues that suggest that there is basically a sort of formation of clubs away from the G20. And then fifth, we argue for the enhancing and strengthening of the surveillance systems. Here we argue for especially the installation of planetary health task force in order to respond to the interlinked threats arising from human, animal, and environmental events that have an impact on global health, and to arrange here also for, within the G7 context now, the respective meetings between G7 health and environmental ministers, just as much as between health, finance, and foreign affairs. Six, we then argue for the strengthening of the research and development infrastructures, as well as the educational infrastructures with regard to global health questions. This is important. We have a situation where the investments into R&D in the field of health globally differ substantially, and we have felt the effects with regard to vaccine inequity in the past years. So we here argue for the implementation of a multilaterally organized R&D investment and agenda setting framework. So basically assure that that R&D funds from G7 countries finance an institution on the multilateral level that allows for joint agenda setting, joint within the UN context agenda setting for research and development around global health questions. And seventh, we argue here for the strengthening of pandemic preparedness and response financing. We have a situation where the existing financing mechanisms do not incentivize or encourage to the required amounts, basically sustained investments in preparedness and also in response capacities with regard to the outbreak of pandemics or epidemics. And with this I end. I think I exceeded my 10 minutes. I apologize, Alexia, for this. And I'm looking forward to the joint discussion after Nicole. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hornidge, not at all. And so now moving on to Nicole's presentation.
Hi, do you hear me now? Now everything is perfect. 2 clicks away. Perfect. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's truly exciting to be here. Greetings from Rome, sunny Rome. I hope maybe you're not in a sunny place if you're so that's the good news to start. It's fascinating. Thank you so much for your presentation, also Professor Hornidge, and it's a pleasure to see how the field of planetary health is evolving, and also to discuss, I think, the challenge of making this conversation moving forward. So my task today is short here. We have 10 minutes. And I would like to maybe zoom in a little bit on the issues of food system. As we know, planetary health is a very large topic, but we do have certain areas that perhaps would give us a lot of potential impact when we're trying to drive this transformation. So I would like to tackle a little bit of why food systems matter for planetary health, then move to what needs to be done to promote positive change, right? It's really about trying to promote this, overcome this implementation gap that we observe despite all the knowledge that we've been gathering on the planetary emergence that we are experiencing. And hopefully we can end a little bit of a key takeaways that you feel positively energized to take part in this conversation. So it is, just to start with a little bit, it is striking that more and more, even with the situation we're living today, combat hunger. It's a goal that is really slipping out of our hands. And at the moment, we do have food systems serving only the nutritional needs of only 6 out of 10 people on this planet. And this means also that 1 in 9 still go to bed on an empty stomach each night. And this is, don't worry if that's photos that remind you during the pandemic. Those are the moments that everybody had those weak moments and very difficult times. But taking now very seriously, healthy diets are really out of reach for half of the world's population. And we see that at the same time we discuss a lot about hunger, the issue is really how do we combat malnutrition? Since 1975, the World Health Organization shows that obesity has tripled. And so we do see that most of the population are living in areas where this obesity and problems with nutrition are killing more than undernutrition. So we are living a little bit in this times of a puzzle, that at the same time we do have this massive production of food, and we there was a lot of progress that we had in terms of health, of course, but we are also throwing a lot of this food away. So more precisely here, there are numbers, different numbers, but one of that we can see from the United Nations Environmental Program is that 17% of the world's food is thrown away. And there was this phrase that really called attention a few years ago, that if food wastage was a country, it would represent the 3rd largest emitting country in the world. So we know that this conversation about food, it's not only about our internally human, our health, but also the health of our planet. So making health food choices is hard. And for too long, we tended to perhaps seeing and blaming the individual for poor food choices. However, more and more, we are seeing how important it is to address this in a systemic way. So the real question is, what kind of decisions we need to take in the upcoming future to ensure that our food systems are more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and of course, to ensure that it's a sustainable food system. And here are there are many reasons that we need to talk about food systems. And we have overfishing, we have soil degradation, we're polluting our soils that give us the basis for everything we need to produce. Of course, the climate emergency, air pollution, and so many of these links, when we talk, even we are living in this triple planetary emergency when we have climate change, biodiversity degradation, and pollution, which, by the way, with the COVID-19, we saw also how the produce and waste became a very drastic problem growing on. So in all this conversation, it's very evident that these things go together, our health through food and nutrition, but also the health of the planet. But this unsustainable food systems, the way we've been producing, is really accentuating inequalities and not collaborating for us to get out of this planetary emergency. When we think about this, a little bit of the conversation today is governing planetary health in an unequal world. There is the most evident type of inequality that I can think of is gender inequality. And when you do see, especially I can give you numbers, I am from Brazil, but when you see in Latin America, after these 2 years of lockdowns and a pandemic, gender equality was a retrocession of about 18 years. So really, it's very well documented in the literature how women are more likely than men to face food insecurity. This has a lot to do with problems of the gender pay gap, access to resources, and so many correlations that if we could invest in gender equality, we would also see a better situation. So what needs to be done? It's a complex task, but we know, and we do have very important information what needs to be done. And with the growing number of people, around 10 billion people by 2050, we do need to feed more and more people, but without using more land. Of course, that's why we are in the era of restorations, not only conserving, but we need to give it back to nature to make sure that we are going back to a balanced relationship. And of course, while finding new technology, new ways to lower our emissions. So when you think of these questions in the times that we're living, there's nothing more urgent than to tackle food systems. And when we see, for example, after the 2 years, the pandemic, now, of course, 2 months of a dramatic conflict in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia together, they are responsible for 30% of our wheat production around the world. So it's not surprising that we are seeing food prices also skyrocketing, problems with fertilizers around the world not being delivered. And of course, a dramatic planetary emerges in terms of a humanitarian crisis, which were already very much, we hear a lot about Ukraine, but of course, the problems that we're having in Yemen or Afghanistan, they didn't disappear and they're just getting worse. So really, and when we think about what the situation we're living is that change is really our only chance. If you want to address, and we do have a world and a global roadmap, which is the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we do tend to spend a lot of time thinking about all the problems, but I think it's very important that we focus on our solutions here. And part of this solution, and that's why I am a fan of the concept of planetary health, not because, although there are a lot of discussions at the conceptual level, however, to me, what is very relevant is that we are now waking up for the urgency to connect agendas, to connect global movements. So the planetary health narrative, that's an expression that I would like to use here, can be transformational and more inclusive. And I do see a type, and I think one of the presentation we just heard, there are signs of policymakers being more open for this connection of agendas. And what because it's really not only climate change changing, we do have this connection of many aspects of the planetary emergency related to the biodiversity, to the pollution, as I said, to biochemical cycles. But what I like here in this figure is when you think about these mediating factors, what is really going to make a difference is about governance, is about how we're investing our resources, about technology, but also how we're distributing this technology and culture and behavior. And that's really the part of the governance that is exciting. And I am here in Rome. I work at the headquarters of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And the exciting news is last year in 2021, we did have, for the first time, a big high-level event called the Food Systems Summit, convened by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to discuss exactly the problem and how we drive the solutions for food systems. And food systems is important because usually when we think about food, it's directly perhaps an association with agriculture. But when you see in this figure here, and there are many illustrations that, for example, when we need to consider the production, the processing, the packaging, the distribution, the consumption, the culture around maybe locally, how are we perceiving and consuming food? And of course, the basis for everything, the natural elements. So it is exciting that there's a lot of efforts now to address food systems. And the most exciting thing that I would like to share with our guests today is that, and it's very recent, we can say we are in the first 100 days of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, because more than having that conversation and making high-level announcements, it's important to do the follow-up. How we actually going to support countries for accelerated action for food systems transformation. So that's an exciting moment that we're trying to, in this hub, which is not a new institution, is hosted by the Office of Sustainable Development Goals at FIO here in Rome. And it's, as I said, not a new institution, but an effort of coordinating a lot of UN agencies to take action to support countries, and using really an ecosystem of support. That is why it's so important to unite and having these multiple stakeholders to inform also how we're going to do at the national level this transformation. So we do need to keep the political momentum. And what does it mean, especially now that we are seeing how budgets are shifting and how important it is to kind of not lose sight of the long term and the root causes of this planetary emergency that we're trying to address. So in terms of action, there are 3 areas here that are very important to concentrate in terms even of research or conversations to how do we overcome these governance failures? Because most of all, we know science is there. We do have enough data, but how do we bring that to wisdom? How do we engage multiple stakeholders to co-create solutions? That's the notion that no discipline and no group alone will be able to drive this transformation. And finally, of course, very, very important, if we are not going to reshift and change the way we distribute our finance and our budgets, we are not going to be talking or implementing planetary health, One Health, or equal health. So if you think about subsidies, I think it's $11 million per minute subsidizing fossil fuels. And if we could, for example, I think I do have the numbers here, half of the agricultural subsidies, if they were repurposed to support the growing foods that really benefits health, we would have an increase of 20% of fruits and vegetables, for example, which could also reducing 2% greenhouse gas emissions. So in conclusion here, there are a lot, what is important and what's exciting about the planetary health is that everyone has the potential to be part of this transformation. And my background is in international relations, and I can tell that before I would never see myself as part of a solution for public health. And now, because we're seeing the importance of bringing this conversation to policymakers, discussing governance, multilateralism, we are part of this solution as well. And essential here is that when we give these numbers, they're not destiny. They're about political choices that we need to, and we have the power to influence them. Second, planetary health offers really this promising framing and narrative, a little bit of a direction that we want to go. And if we need, the book was Breaking the Silence for Planetary Health, is really, there's a lot that needs to be broken and perhaps united when we talk also about mindsets. And finally, policy choices, they need to be made to protect the health of the most vulnerable. And we have now here discussing how human health can not only be perceived as something that is disconnected from our environment. So really, in conclusion, I think food production is not the problem. Inequality is. There is so much that needs to be done there. And however, it's really hard to quantify these things. So a lot of discussions to be that we can have on this point. I would be pleased to connect with you and happy to have a conversation during this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Excellent presentations from both of you. And now we are almost 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes left. So I'll kick off a question for both of you, and then we'll open up the questions to the rest of the floor, if that's okay. They're more sort of presentation specific questions. So Ms. Hornidge, Professor Hornidge, I was wondering, how does the Global Health Compact deliver on sustainable development aims and other areas that are important for planetary health? As Dr. Nicole mentioned, that the planetary health narrative really is about connecting different agendas. So how does this Global Health Compact deliver on other sustainable development aims, if at all?
Thanks, Alexia. I mean, the Global Health Compact 2030, of course, on the one side with the 2030 sort of, bridges already the discussion within the health community and the Agenda 2030 overall community, as well as links it also with the Beyond 2030 discussion. At the same time, I should also be very honest. The idea of suggesting a global compact to the G7 is was also chosen maybe as a strategic tool in order to bring together the recommendations formulated in the group of health experts in a way that it's a sort of bundled package, yeah? A package that can be taken to the health ministers and then there be unpacked, no? And be unpacked also partly through the planetary health concept, yeah? Which today, this afternoon, I actually had a meeting with the German Minister of Health, who immediately picked out the planetary health aspect as well as the R&D aspect. So the lacking research and development infrastructure for health, maybe not in Germany, but in many, many other regional contexts, which brings us again and again to a situation that certain diseases are basically very well researched while others are not, no? And certain vaccines are being produced while others are not. Yeah? So yeah, maybe so much. There is also an element, there's the practical element to it, that it packages the messages in a way that it can be unpacked again by bringing the planetary health concept in. But there's also a strategic element for as part of the considerations for basically being able to tell one story that can be listened to rather than many stories through which it gets too much. No? And I mean, in many ways, there's also already something. I think it will be interesting to also hear Nicole's assessments. Nicole mentioned several times the term narrative, and of course that is an important tool in policy advisory activities, and at the same time it reaches its limits, no? Because it also does then summarize and hide details sometimes.
Thank you very much, Professor Hornidge. I will move on to a question for Dr. Paula, for Nicole. I was interested in learning more about how you think inequality foments unsustainable food systems, which therefore compromise planetary health. So I think the narrative around planetary health tends to be around, planetary ill health can deepen inequalities. But how might the reverse be the case, whereby initial inequalities drive planetary ill health?
Yeah, it's a good question. And when we talk about, when I think about overexploitation of resources or the lack of access, right? When you think about when women in particular is a good example, and I like to think about that just because I don't see myself as a gender expert or not even a health expert. So now moving to this conversation to a lot of gender equality and public health demonstrates that we were not connecting the dots when there are so many policy proposals, right? And I can talk a lot about the multilateral level because that's what I have the most experience. I do a lot of I start with climate diplomacy, biodiversity, and now I even proposed a short article with what would be the planetary health diplomacy? What does it mean? But because these inequalities, it's very hard to translate them to policymakers. But at the same time, we are usually in this high-level forums, and there are so many discussions and dialogues. And however, when we are proposing policies and really concrete things on the ground, we tend to ignore this power asymmetries. So I think in terms, for example, on the food systems, access to land, when we don't have, if you can propose, could be organic or any other solution that in theory is very much, let's say, sustainable. But if you go there and the social norms of a certain country or of a region, they're not taking that aspects into account, the solution is just a cycle that we never leave that cycle. So the power asymmetries of vulnerable populations or indigenous populations, systemic prejudice, that's a discussion that is so important also these days, and how they are not necessarily supporting the solutions that we have. I'm not sure if I'm responding exactly to your questions, but that's how I can frame this conversation, is just not is the implementation gap, that despite the knowledge that we have and so many, let's say, a lot of mechanisms and tools and kits, and we try always to bring some sort of universal solutions, which we know that what really make a difference is at the national level or even locally. So that's why it's so important also to bring, let's say, cities or local people to drive this transformation. So the lack of access to land, for example, even there is even data from 2014, and I'm sure we have, but out of 160 countries, we have 59 countries which allow women and men to have equal rights. So we think it's just a detail, but it's not. This is something that persistent in every many way. And also with the pandemic, when we see we are delaying this action, when we there was a lot of attention, and I think that's probably why One Health and Planetary Health got a lot of space, is that what is the real antidote to, let's say, future pandemics? When you think about nature conservation or having addressing illegal wildlife trade, for example, the zoonotic diseases, they are coming from somewhere, right? When we're diminishing the space, that we're making also wild animals refugees in a sense, because they're losing their natural habitats. We are not, that's not the prevention. So if we're joining, the pandemic preparedness that we need, that we recommend, if we not connect this to the environmental aspects, this is not really a long-term solution. And it's just kind of what is really hard, especially with the short cycle political cycles that we have, is how do we keep these long-term solutions being followed up by future, and how, if the definition of success is having the higher GDP. So what it needs to happen is the whole redefinition of what it means, economic success.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I have a question here in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat. If not, I'll read the question out to you. So, so someone here asking about that the EU's farm to fork strategy has been postponed indefinitely due to the war in Ukraine, and that environmental issues don't seem to be a priority. They are not the ones deciding elections in democratic systems. So isn't this one of the root causes of why we're seeing an implementation gap? And shouldn't we be paying much more attention to healthy democracies where voters can understand what's best for the common good and vote accordingly? So I don't know who would want to take that question first. Maybe Nicole?
I can just make a call. Absolutely. I mean, this is a very important aspect. And I do have other presentations, other slides, when there's one slide specifically saying that what is essential is if we don't have healthy democracies, we're not going to have any sorts of sustainable development. Even if you see the sustainable development goals, right, at the end, it's about partnerships and it's about justice and also the legal aspects of all this. So healthy democracies, sure. And I think what the current conflict is showing us, that also how much of internal problems, or even in the West, how we were dealing with the policy incoherences. And I think that's one of the most important aspects here. It's when the EU have, and I'm speaking, that's one of notions when we have developing countries, you can have a very ambitious policy, but then if on the other hand, on your other policy, subsidies to agriculture, for example, are not supporting what you are defending on your farm to fork, for example. If you see these incoherences, and normally you can find them when you go to World Trade Organization very quickly, that's one of the challenges that we have. But definitely now what we're seeing is somehow of maybe a rethinking, and when we have, this is a process of 20 years of we talk about multipolar world, right? Who is defining the global rules? So a lot of rethinking here, and I think I'm sure in Germany, very important conversations that we are having now.
Thank you very much, Dr. De Paula. So I would perhaps move this question over to Ms. Hornidge, but with an additional question that we have in the chat, which is, are global governance systems fit for purpose to tackle the planetary health crisis? And how do global governance systems need to change to achieve the transformation needed?
Thanks. I mean, I think we can observe at the moment that we are challenged by a weakened multilateral system, a weakened system that, I mean, the weakening process, so to say, has gone on for a while. Also, the Trump presidency contributed to it, unfortunately, substantially. And at the same time, this weakening has taken place at the same time as we have seen in all over the world, actually, increasing polarization and also autocratization processes. We by now, just to link it also to the democracy question as part of the first question, by now 63% of the world population live in autocracies. So the minority actually lives in democracies, and there are 34% of the countries now are being classified as autocratizing, as going through autocratizing processes. So basically, there is a lot of movement that we have to take into account, and that also contributes to the further undermining of the multilateral system. So is the global governance fit for purpose? When we think of planetary health, then we must honestly say no, it is not. But what is then the conclusion out of this realization? I think the conclusion has to be that we, and with this I mean the G7 countries as well as the G20 countries, well, but maybe let's start with the G7 countries, explicitly invest into the multilateral system, and then, and that's the second aspect, find fruitful ways of facilitating the dialogue within the G20. I mean, we now have a situation that already just symbolically indicated by the discussion of whether Putin is attending or not the G20 summit in Indonesia, and who else is then attending. It illustrates how weakened this platform at the moment is, and one must honestly say that is the decisive platform in terms of club governance formats. It's not the G7. Yeah? I mean, the music is playing in Brazil, in India, in South Africa, in China, the music of the future, and thus I think the G7 is very, very well advised if it consciously reflects on how to on the one side formulate clear positions for itself, for instance, democracy as democracy, human rights as values that these economies stand up for. But then at the same time, on that basis of formulating a clear position, seek constructive dialogues with the big players and basically the BRICS countries in order to address the global challenges, but here really the challenges within the environmental sphere, within social context or social inequalities, as well as questions of global health. No? And yeah, there we have a bit of a road ahead of us. So maybe just to add this as well, I think it's highly problematic at the moment how we can observe in the media sort of a reinvigoration of narratives that work with the West versus then who exactly. Yeah, and I think that's this sort of rhetorical strengthening of a binary world order is highly not only problematic, but it's risky, and it also defeats reality. You know? Because we also know that the world order as we so far know it, and that is shifting and that is being renegotiated already since a number of years, is being renegotiated only to a very, very limited degree territorially. Yeah, so the territorial renegotiation process that we now see in the Ukraine is only a small part. the larger part of these renegotiation processes is actually taking place deterritorial. So meaning through trade sanctions, or trade policies, through information policies and politics, through all forms of policy making that shape the geopolitical together. And of course here our answers towards finding forms of international cooperation within this shifting world order are absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hornidge. We are unfortunately and very sadly out of time. So I would really love to ask you, to each of the speakers, to provide one sentence on how you would govern planetary health in an unequal world. So I don't know if Nicole, you want to go first?
Of course, because I have no idea how I would govern, but I think in one word, definitely you need to combat inequalities and start with the gender one, because it's just a easy win, and it's about changing social norms, and that's very easy to do. So, but just one comment on this geopolitical. I think what is important for planetary health, and is also that we take this conversation about geopolitics, about multilateralism into the conversation. It's not a technical aspect, so that's very important.
Thank you, Ms. Hornidge.
Alexia, one sentence that's a bit harsh, I must say. But if I only have one sentence, I would say we need to invest into shrinking spaces, into shrinking spaces on all levels, because there is no one form of governance. It's not global governance or nothing. And what we observe is shrinking spaces for democratic fights, basically the democratic negotiation forms of reality, and that, in my view, creates a situation where we forget about the common challenges that we need to address and that require common and joint approaches. Not quite one sentence.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, this is it. Thank you very much to our speakers for joining us. Professor Hornidge, Professor Nicole de Paula. Thank you, Laura, for hosting us, and Joe from the department for organizing this event. And I close this event, therefore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura, did you want me to leave the session open, or can I end this session? Are you guys going to stay and talk a bit?
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit, but you can stop the recording, I think.
Yes, thank you very much.